Wanted to, um, turn it over again to Stephen Rodriguez and bring him back on. He's going to be talking about realizing the potential of data in support of the national security. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Great. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I thought it was a relevant and timely crossover to our fireside chat with Alex Wang. And Alex, if you can unmute and turn on your camera while I tee everything up, that'll be great.
Yeah, perfect. But quick note, it says I can't turn on my camera because of the host, actually. So, oh, perfect, great, amazing.
So there you are. So interesting. I found a quote by General Jack Shanahan, the founding director of the Joint AI Center, that I thought was a great way to tee up this next discussion. And he said, shortly before the pandemic started, some people say data is the new oil. I don't like that. I treat it as mineral ore. There's a lot of crap. You have to filter out the impurities from the raw material to get the gold nuggets, end quote. In other words, I took it to say the military has all the data it needs to train its AI solutions. It just needs to find it, cleanse it, and process it. And only then does our government stand to realize the potential of programs like the aforementioned Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2 program, and the Advanced Battle Management System, or ABMS program, to their fullest extent. It's a bit of a word salad there, but I thought it was a great way to tee up a successful entrepreneur and founder. You don't often get a chance to meet and talk with people who didn't just join a company and that was already successful and continued on to that success, but start a company from scratch and be very successful in the process of doing so. So Alex, very glad to have you join us. I thought as kind of an opening question, would love to hear more about your own background leading up to the founding of Scale AI, and what made you decide to start a company like Scale to begin with.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. First of all, thanks so much for having me. Always excited to chat with Stephen and excited to chat as part of the America's Future series. So, to walk back through, I'll talk not only about how I came to start Scale, but also why actually we got so involved with the U.S. government, U.S. government work, and sort of tie that entire story together. So, I originally grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Actually, both my parents work for the national lab there. They're both scientists working at that national lab. And so I grew up, every year, or honestly every month, I would learn about sort of this incredible story about how science and technology was this critical component to ending a huge amount of conflict and ending, and bringing about this sort of period of significant peace. And so that example, it'll become relevant later on, but that was really drilled into me from a very young age. And then I was studying. So then when I was sort of going through my schooling, I was very excited to study AI and machine learning because it was sort of this incredibly new technology and sort of and area of a lot of interesting research, but also one that sort of, I think many technologists sort of dream of the potential positive impacts of AI and machine learning and what that could mean for the world. And I was studying AI and machine learning at MIT. This was the year when DeepMind came out with AlphaGo, Google released TensorFlow, sort of a big watershed year for AI. And I wanted to try building something on my own. So I tried building a camera inside my fridge that could tell me when my roommates were stealing my food. And I worked on that for all of a few weeks before realizing that there was no way that I could build that as a college student in my dorm room, because there was just no way for me to get access to all the data that I needed, and that's sort of when I had some of the core realizations for Scale, which is that we believe that data is the new code. So if you think about what's the lifeblood of these AI machine learning systems of the future, that's all data. And this is a huge departure from how we've thought about technology and software today, which is thinking about it in a very code-centric way. And so had this sort of big realization around the strategic sort of value and importance of data going into the future. And then also realizing that, hey, there was no infrastructure provider that was going to help other organizations build incredible data and machine learning data sets to power their AI efforts. And so we got started, started Scale, and we actually originally were very focused on the autonomous vehicle sector and the technology sector. And those are sort of the early use cases where we saw just massive amounts of data. In the autonomous vehicle sector, it was life or death scenarios, which I will draw commonality to here in a sec to the U.S. government problem domain. And it was honestly, it was such a gift to be able to work in such incredibly innovative and interesting fields. And then fast forward to 2019, 2020, that timeframe when sort of there were a few things that were kind of all happening at once. First, there was and this was talked about a lot within Silicon Valley, our Scale is based in San Francisco. There's this avoidance and unwillingness of many of the iconic Silicon Valley companies to work with the U.S. government, which always felt very weird to me. Again, growing up, both my parents worked at a national lab. It felt really weird that many of these brilliant engineers and scientists weren't willing to serve their nation. And then the second one was which sort of made this more urgent, was all of the progress that had been made in China with respect to facial recognition technology and their sort of core AI technologies. And I was watching this from a research perspective. If you looked at the sort of papers and the research coming out of some of these organizations in China, it was incredibly strong research, and it was in many ways it even surpassed some of what was happening in the United States. And so again, I grew up in Los Alamos, and I'd seen sort of how the atomic bomb sort of shaped world events, and I realized that artificial intelligence had the potential to be as impactful technology for sort of how the world unfolded, and realized that it was sort of our duty as an infrastructure provider to be able to empower the US government with the best AI technology and the best data to empower their AI technologies. And I think it flows really well into what you just mentioned, which is around, hey, how do we solve this sort of data gap for the US government? What is sort of the shape of that problem? And I actually really agree. I think that the beauty of it is that the US government, the DoD, the intelligence community, many parts of the US government have invested a huge amount of resources over the past many decades in data collection platforms and incredibly sophisticated sensor modalities. And we're sitting on a wealth of data, actually. And what we need is, I think for the US to lead from here on out, we need to sort of have a national data strategy that figures out how do we turn all of this effectively, raw product that we're sitting on, or sort of like untapped potential that we're sitting on for AI algorithms and systems of the future, and sort of harness that for, building best-in-class AI systems that sort of protect our nation and protect the world for the decades to come.
Great. And I want to touch on Russia, China, and this national data strategy you mentioned shortly. From your perspective, Alex, we saw each other at the Reagan National Defense Forum, I think in December, which feels like 7 years and dog years, the way things are going with the pandemic. So you obviously know a lot of people in the government and in the commercial world. From your perspective, do leaders in the government understand what their data problem is? And from your perspective, what is the magnitude of that problem? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that it's actually a little nuanced what the data problem is, right? I think that a lot of times when leaders within government think about the data problem, I think we think that it's a problem of, hey, we don't have enough data. And China, because of their more loose privacy standards and how they feel about their citizens' data, they're always going to come out ahead. And I actually don't think that's right. I think it's more about making sure that we have the right data and that we have really high quality data, and we have and we make good use of that. That's actually going to set us apart much more so than just having tons and tons of data, because these AI systems, they're very much so garbage in, garbage out. So even if you throw just a huge amount of data, if that's not valuable or high quality or messy or unstructured in some way, then that's not going to result in a really high quality algorithm. And so I think that we need to, I think oftentimes I hear this sort of refrain, which is that, hey, because of, some of these democratic standards and our belief in personal liberties, like that means we're always going to be behind China or Russia in AI. And I don't think it's true at all. I think that we can form an incredible, very efficacious data strategy that is aligned with our values and aligned with how we want to run. And so the magnitude is the magnitude of the entire AI problem set, right? And there's a bunch of examples and research of this. If you look at what does an AI scientist or an AI practitioner spend 80-90% of their time on, that's all in the data. And so if we're not able to produce for them the right data standards and data foundations and data sets, then they're going to be unable to produce anything at the end of the day. And then if you look at what is the key determinant of model performance, model efficacy, model validation, all these things that are obviously going to be critical to our future technologies, it all comes down to data. And so I think that the stakes are high. If we don't produce, whether it's a national data strategy or every service has a data strategy or whatever form that takes, if we don't produce that, then I think we're going to constantly be hamstrung in this, in the race for AI. And so it's a key component of it. And so, but I think it's very tractable. I don't think it's impossible for us to come out ahead. I think we just need to be smart. We need to be thoughtful about the data that we already have and how do we make the best use of it? How do we find, the needles in the haystack in our existing data and use that to build incredible technology.
You mentioned Russia and China before, Alex. Do they have a national data strategy from your perspective? Pick either or and what are they doing? We talk a lot about what they're doing right. At times there's almost a bit of hagiography when it comes to our adversaries. From your perspective, what concerns you have, if any, with regard to the way they approach data, whether they have a strategy or not?
Yeah. So I think that I think undeniably China, especially in areas that they view as critical, like facial recognition or other forms of sort of like AI systems that improve their sort of surveillance state, they have incredibly sophisticated AI strategies, all the way from they have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the countryside of China who are sort of effectively data analysts combing through huge amounts of whether it be facial data or image data or sort of other forms of visual data to identify, what are things of interest, where are the needles in the haystack, so to speak, that I kind of mentioned before. So there's this incredibly large scale, effectively economy built up around building data and this data strategy for the United States government that you can find articles about sort of these, I think they refer to them as data factories within China. And so they've been very aggressive, as well as a very aggressive public-private partnership strategy around, China. It's very clear their AI strategy is to aggressively fund effectively startups within China who their only customer is the Chinese government, and those startups are then able to hire the best in class talent from the top universities. And so that model,
these are the national champions they talk about, right? Is that correct?
Exactly. And that model, I think, is effective. Now, I don't think it is. I think that it's effective. They produce lots of data. They produce great data sets. They produce great technology. And I think we need to take some of those components and copy them or sort of like leverage them within our system. I think, for example, working extensively with the private sector and working with our tech industry. The United States is the best tech industry in the world. We're the most innovative. We produce the best technology in the world. We should leverage that partnership. A bunch has been said about that. I don't need to say much more. and then we need to similarly, I think, have a data strategy. The one area where we're significantly far ahead of China is really coming into advanced defense and intelligence capability quite very recently. And so they don't have an incredible depth and breadth of sort of existing data and existing analysis that's been done to be able to leverage and bootstrap their algorithms. And we do. And I think that the sort of like depth, breadth, sort of craft, and all of everything that we've built up as a nation over the course of the past, many decades is an incredible base for us to build incredibly sophisticated AI systems. And I think that, if I were to say what are the pillars of said national AI strategy, I think we need to take our existing data sets and our existing analysis and figure out how to leverage that for AI systems as quickly as possible. That's sort of the step 0 or step 1. That's the lowest hanging fruit. And then pull in an approach and a funded approach to produce really high quality data sets out of this data that then become utilized by every single relevant military organization or intelligence organization to be able to build, effectively the AI platforms of the future. And I think that I think is critical for us to do, as quickly as we can.
That's great. I appreciate you outlining that. Pivoting from Russia and China to the U.S., this problem, it's not news to either one of us that this is not the first time someone has contemplated solving or even defining the problem that we're talking about today yet again. From your perspective, what do you see other vendors trying to accomplish in tackling this specific government-centric problem, and how, again, as the founder of S.C.A.L.E., how do you and S.C.A.L.E. view solving these problems?
Yeah, I think there's probably two major things that we see. I think that there's a class of startup and technology company trying to work with the U.S. government that they've built some incredible technology, whether it's from research at university or something that they'd built, based on experience at another company. But it is an experimental technology that, frankly, it's not clear if that's ready to be, really productionized and fielded for hardcore military applications. And so there's a lot of startups that I see that are trying to work with the U.S. government, and I think it's worthwhile for us to go through that effort. But that's not going to be the solutions to our at-scale problems today and our sort of our mission-critical applications that we need to be building right now. And so I think that the approach, whether it be S.C.A.L.E. or a handful of other companies, I think take this approach is to fully recognize and understand what are the mission objectives and sort of the realities on the ground of how these missions are occurring, and then figuring out how we can augment that with best-in-class technology while enabling very high bars of quality and efficacy and validation, and ensuring that these systems are incredibly robust so that you don't have unintended consequences when they're ultimately fielded, and we're able to manage those consequences very well. And so that, I think, is one of the big things. And I think about the use cases or the areas where we're really involved. ISR PED is one major area, and it's one where I think it's clear intuitively. Hey, if you have in sophisticated AI machine learning, you can do significantly more automated analysis. Obviously, this is incredibly relevant in the current Russia-Ukraine scenario, but I think it's critical that when you actually build these AI systems, that you're able to get a handle on their performance, and that you're able to know when the algorithms aren't performing well, so you can ask an expert analyst. And sort of these nuances to these systems really hold back, I think, a lot of production grade ML, or a lot of ML from being fielded properly within the DoD. So I think that's probably the key thing. If I were someone within the DoD, within the who was thinking about how to best build AI technology and AI capabilities, I really think about at-scale players who can actually take it from prototype to production.
So earlier, I guess in the morning, my time, early morning, your time, I hosted the Venture Investing in Dual Use Technology panel. So I had a bunch of VCs on, several who you likely know or even invested in Scale. And it dawned on me as I was preparing for the panel that Scale actually kind of fits in this relevant use case as well. And that is you have a government business, right? And then you also have, I think where you started, your commercial business. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so you have kind of a foot in both worlds, if you will. As someone who's in a, I guess, dual use technology business, what does success look like to you, Alex, in terms of building a company and as an entrepreneur? So, this is obviously as the founder of Scale, but also someone who's running a venture-backed business that is doing well by many of the standards we talked about this morning with the venture investors. How do you view success as a I guess this is the question. How do you view success as a founder with a business case developing in both commercial and government sectors?
Yeah. For us, I think it ultimately comes down to enabling our customers to be as successful as possible. And the government and the sort of defense intelligence mission set is one that I personally view as critically important. And I think over the course of the next, decade will be, I truly believe that, we have the opportunity, Scale has the opportunity, the US government has the opportunity to build some of the most defining technologies that will shape the next 50 years of sort of world of global affairs. So I think it's an incredibly important mission set. I think one of the areas in which being a dual use company is incredibly beneficial is that we have the ability to see, leverage, and build technologies for some of the most innovative organizations in the world, some of those innovative tech companies, innovative AI teams, innovative sort of tinkers and builders and inventors, and then do all of that with these very sophisticated, fast-moving commercial partners, and then take all of that best-in-class technology and apply it to the U.S. government problem domain. And a lot of times, the companies that we work with in the private sector, they would never naturally bring a lot of their technology to the U.S. government. I think it's a real travesty, honestly, but it's true. And I think a lot of that is because maybe they don't think about it. Maybe they don't, maybe the business model doesn't make sense for them, a whole variety of reasons. But I think that's part of the incredible benefit. I'll give a few examples. We work with some of the largest, most sophisticated developers of autonomous vehicle technology in the world, companies like Toyota or General Motors, or innovative startups like Aurora, Neuro, et cetera. And that space has been incredibly, within the commercial sector, has seen an incredible amount of innovation as of late, and is implementing like the best in class new techniques from machine learning research into their programs. They have incredible hardware techniques, they have all these things. And autonomy is clearly a very important mission set for the US government as well. And so our ability to just translate our learnings and our product set and our experience from the commercial sector over to the public sector is incredibly valuable and beneficial, and accelerates our ability to succeed as quickly as possible. So I think, I would be remiss to say, I think we definitely want to be growing our commercial business, but I think one of the key outcomes, or one of the key success metrics that I personally see is, hey, if we can properly translate those technologies over to government problem sets, that's incredibly rewarding.
And speaking of lessons learned from commercial customers or use cases and translating those to the U.S. government, are there any specific examples you're able to share from your U.S. government work where you've kind of seen that play out? And feel free to say it's ongoing as well.
Yeah, lots of ongoing effort. So one is this work in autonomy. So the U.S. government is investing into a number of different autonomy platforms across sea, air, space, and land, obviously. and I think that, like, we've built, all this technology that we've built up is immediately applicable to building out those autonomy platforms, which is incredibly accelerating. The ISR PED use case that I mentioned before is another really strong one, where we've built out a huge amount of technology to enable for best-in-class object recognition, best-in-class image data sets, best-in-class understanding of really rare scenarios and objects in sort of imagery. And that translates perfectly to the intelligence and analysis problem domain, where it's about finding needles in haystacks. It's about finding, that one or two, objects that seem a little bit off, that give you a tip that something's going on. That really is a very that leverages a lot of the technology we built up, not only for the autonomous vehicle companies, but also for the big tech companies that are really thinking about this from a mapping perspective, as well as large scale computer vision perspective. So those are some of the ones that are, and these are, they're continuing, they're all ongoing. And a lot of these problems, I guess the last one I'll mention, because we talked about JADC2 here earlier. The JADC2 problem domain, whether it be with, we primarily work with ABMS, but the key thing that we found is in robotics, there's this concept of sensor fusion, which is how do you take in all the different sensors that you might have and integrate those into one common operating view that you can then use to make decisions on top of. Well, I think JADC2 is the same thing on an entire battlefield scale, but a lot of JADC2 is about how do you integrate all the different sensors and sort of signals that you're going to get from every single one of the sort of touch points on the battlefield, and integrate those into one common operating view that you can use to properly dispatch or utilize your resources effectively. And so that the core sensor fusion technology we've built out within robotics domain immediately applies to a lot of the JADC2 use case as well.
That's great. Alex, thank you for sharing that. And we've completely blown through our time, which is always a good thing. Maybe as a closing comment, in a lot of these panels and discussions, we tend to get really tactical, lots of hand wringing and chin stroking around what do we do, how do we solve these problems, and we get into I guess the minutia, which is good, of trying to tackle wicked hard problems. Maybe as a closing comment, from your perspective as someone who kind of deals in the details of realizing artificial intelligence solutions, what are some of AI's, I guess, greatest impacts from I don't want to say for good, but what's the opportunity space we're really dealing with here? Like what if we solve this problem around data? It's not just about the data, obviously, but can you kind of paint a broader picture around what the world or what our capabilities could look like if we, get a handle on our data and, to quote General Shanahan, treat it more like ore that needs to be, farmed and refined and getting all the crap out of it.
Yeah. And do you mean specifically within the sort of like U.S. government defense intelligence problem domain, or do you mean sort of more broadly within the sort of like the world at large?
Feel free. I mean, preferably more broadly, but either or from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'll touch on both really quickly. I think that from a U.S. government or defense and intelligence standpoint, I think a massive benefit is going to be really, if I were to put it glibly, like end the senseless fighting. But I think that, with incredible AI technology, I think we're going to be able to get into a scenario where we're not going to need as much in-person conflict, and there won't be a need for as much sort of active combat scenarios, because we're able to operate so much more safely and so much more intelligently, because we're able to integrate so much more information and data that's constantly flowing throughout the world. And that's going to result in, a lot less combat and a much smarter combat when it's absolutely necessary, or a lot. And so I think that's sort of one of the critical components or the critical objectives I think we can accomplish with AI. So I think a 10x reduction in the amount of conflict in any scenario, I think is not unreasonable. And then I think that from a global perspective, frankly, I think AI is it's going to be like the internet or like the computer originally or software. It's just going to touch every single part of our lives. And we're not even going to like fully understand all the ways in which it's going to change our lives in the future. But just a few of them, right now there's a 10x shortage of doctors globally. Most people in the world who want medical support are unable to get medical support. Even for those of us in, a developed country like the United States, a lot of people aren't able to get sort of the proper medical support they need. And that's because of ultimately a bottleneck of being able to train doctors and train medical professionals in the world. And if we have proper AI technologies and proper AI systems that are able to treat people using automated methods and only call in a doctor when it's absolutely necessary, that's going to be this huge unlock to, frankly, global health of the world. Another major problem is world hunger. Right now, there's incredible shortages with our ability to produce enough crop and enough food globally to be able to feed the sort of growing global population. That's one where you can use AI to not only automate but also improve yields of farms and of our crop to dramatically close the gap on that problem, which I think is incredibly critical. And then there's more personal things as well, where I think, and I'll maybe end on this one. I think that the United States is going through a mental health crisis, or the world generally is going through a mental health crisis. And I think that the capability for AI and machine learning to serve as almost friends in many of these scenarios and serve to really mitigate the downsides of some of the mental health epidemic is going to be absolutely massive. And so I think the use cases are varied. The impact is going to be incredibly massive, and sort of it's exciting to be able to work on this technology.
Well, Alex, we need to go on a road trip because I've actually done some work in Los Alamos and discovered one of the best Mexican food restaurants. And calling it a restaurant is more like a shack in Española, of all places. You might have been there, out in the middle of nowhere, that had the I think they were sopapillas that would make your head explode. And they
El
were about as
Parasol?
big as
El Parasol or a different?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
If I guess if our audience learned anything today, it's that there is phenomenal Mexican food just outside Los Alamos, New Mexico. Alex, thank you very, very much for joining us and taking the time. And gentlemen, thank you for organizing this, and I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you much, Stephen. And Alex, thank you very, very much. Most interesting, very intriguing. And I love the fact that you know so much about restaurants too. That's just great too. Oh, that's great. You never know what you're going to get here on America's Future Series, huh?